This is the Catholic Wire.
Today we're going to jump to an encyclical by Leo XIII. And I'll be entirely honest with you. I don't know much about his life. I haven't read a full book of his life. I read all of his encyclicals, I believe, at least the most important ones. I can't say all of them. But can we pass them on? Yeah. But of his life, I don't know much. To be quite honest, it's something that I still need to study. Something that does always strike me about him is that when you see him, he would seem to be a weak man when you see his picture. You know, he was a very frail, complexion, you could say. But in my mind, he's actually one of the strongest popes in his mindset and how he acted. And this encyclical to me is huge in that sense. Leo XIII is the first one that we have video of. There's actually some footage of him where you can see him walking. Very, very old footage, like some of the first cameras that they had. And he is notorious for a few things. You know, one of them is he would make encyclicals about the Rosary, very, very, very often. He would make one after another after another. I think he had probably 10 or so. He was also particular as a pope because, to my knowledge at least, he's probably the first pope and the last to command that the whole church would pray this prayer or that prayer. That's a very risky thing to do as a pope, if you think about it, because it's like you don't want to impose too many things on the church because, you know, people have their own devotions. Each church has their own devotions. And if you're a pope, as a pope, you're saying, now everybody's going to pray this. It can be a burdensome thing. But he did several. The October Rosary, an exposition of the Blessed Sacrament, comes from Leo XIII. He was the one that established that. He's the one that established the prayers that we say at the end of the Mass. As you all know, it was a longer prayer, and actually I do want to bring that later on. If we have time, maybe I won't. So he did a lot of those things. And at his time, the Papal States had been lost already. And so he lives at that time where they call the Pope the prisoner in the Vatican. That's where the term comes from. Because he was not living in his sovereign country anymore. It had been taken by the enemy. And Leo XIII, there was a big controversy at his time because he said Catholics are not allowed to participate in the government at all because this is an illegitimate government. These people were revolutionaries that took over. So Catholics are not allowed to vote. They're not allowed to have any position. This changed. A lot of it was changed during the time of Pius X and later on because the government established itself and then Catholics were being left out. So the Pope ended up saying, you know what, let's just go ahead and try to work within so that we can start at least to try to stop some of the liberal policies. And eventually we got to the time of Pius XI, I think it was, where the government granted to the Pope Vatican City, what you know as Vatican City now, just a little tiny piece of land that is, quote unquote, his country, but it's pretty much useless. It's just a political statement, really. This encyclical, I was saying, well, what I was going to show to you that I won't because it would be too long or it would add too much time is Leo XIII makes the exorcism that becomes really famous. That was the exorcism that before you would pray after the Mass. I prayed that exorcism repeatedly, a lot of times. And that exorcism is very notorious because in it, he says that the devil, Satan, is going to sit on Rome. Now, to be quite honest, or rather to be honest, I should say, that could have meant in the mind of Leo XIII that Masonry was establishing itself in Rome, not necessarily in the Holy See, because at his time that happened. At his time there was a convention of Masonic societies, and publicly they, or at least he found out, that they had determined to go to Rome and to become a stronghold in Rome. And he actually mentions that in one of his encyclicals, not in this one. So he could have meant that in the exorcism, but when you read the exorcism, it's quite interesting to see that Leo XIII at his time, he has this exorcism where it says, and they are going to sit here in the seat of Peter. And he says in the exorcism, well, I'm saying it anyways, he says in the exorcism, so that having stricken the pastor or the shepherd, the sheep will disperse. That exorcism, the exorcism of Leo XIII, was shortened afterwards to what we pray now, the St. Michael the Archangel one. But it used to be a lot longer. And we still pray it. And he asked the priests to pray it upon cities, and especially towards the city of Rome. It wasn't an exorcism that you would pray on one person. You would pray it in general to ask that, or rather to expel the devil from influencing cities. And the church in itself. This encyclical, Humanum Genus, talks about Masonry. I feel kind of bad because all the topics that I picked for this week are all like, dark, terrible things. I kind of wanted to hit at everything in 1 week. Maybe next year we'll do some beautiful things too. Masonry, secret societies. What I'm going to say right now is absolutely my personal opinion. There are no books or authors, to my knowledge, that say this. There must be a few. I don't know of any. But there's a question about the origins of Freemasonry. Where did it come from? And if you read their books, they'll say, that they come from Solomon, from the Temple of Solomon, that they come from the old mysteries of Egypt, all these poetical origins. Many people, if you go in Google online, don't do it, but if you Google online, you would see, they come from the builders of the cathedrals. That's the most common opinion, that supposedly the builders of the cathedrals had their secret, their secrets of the trade, and they organized in guilds. Do you say guilds or guilds? Guilds, thank you. And these guilds ended up becoming secret societies, and that's how you got Freemasonry. I'm not going to give you a conclusion because, as I say again, it's my personal opinion, but I'll give you facts, and you can come up with your own conclusions. There's a really good book that I recommend. It's called, probably most of you have read it, Characters of the Inquisition. This is by Thomas Walsh. Raise your hands if you've read it. No? Okay. It's a really good book. It's a really good book because it's one of those books. There's a book by him back there by Philip II too. He wrote a lot of those. He was a very good historian, and he's a very it's a very easy read. One of those books that you just can't stop reading it. I found that book in Minnesota, in the church in Minnesota, and I needed something to read. I grabbed it, and one of those times where you're just reading until midnight, and you're like, I have to wake up early tomorrow. I gotta stop. And I read like half of it in like 2 days. Very, very good book. Okay, this book speaks about what I'm going to tell you right now. When you hear the word Inquisition, the Inquisition from Spain, like the one from the 1500s, what comes to your mind? Well, honestly. The Aztecs? Yeah, there was an Inquisition there too, yeah. What is your impression of the Inquisition? Does anybody think cruelty, burning alive, putting them in chairs with pikes and stuff, all that stuff? The truth is, the Inquisition was made, it was a tribunal. Many people think it was a tribunal to judge heretics. It was a tribunal to judge clergy. It wasn't to judge the Jews or the Muslims or the heretics. They were left alone, quote unquote, as long as they were open about it. If someone was an open Jew or an open Muslim, yes, they would not have privileges because they were living in a Catholic society, so certainly they would keep them out of certain things. But this tribunal was made for this reason. The kings of Spain, especially the Catholic kings of Spain, Isabella, they start getting word that there is infiltrated people in the church, that there are bishops and superiors of orders that are infiltrating the church. We're talking about the 1400s here. And they actually get very reliable information about this. They actually had a situation, there were bishops, there was a situation of the superior of the Order of St. Jerome. I'm talking about the general superior, the top one of the order, was an infiltrated Jew. And he became famous. Well, the case became famous because he would never consecrate. He would take the host and he would say, "Rise, St. Peter," in whatever language he might be saying it. And he would never consecrate. So this was a very big problem. And the kings of Spain say to the Pope, "We can't judge clergy." Remember that the clergy has a forum, a special forum. They can't be judged by the civil authority. So they say, "We can't judge clergy. We can't handle this. We need some authority." And that's where they establish the Inquisition, which means research, to do an investigation on someone. It's a tribunal to judge false clergy. The reason why I bring that up, and this you will find it here in this book, that's where I got it from. The reason why I bring that up is to make the point that infiltration begins in the church, or rather the efforts of infiltration begin in the 1400s, and even before, I would say. We're talking about Freemasonry. This keeps going on. The Catholic kings start making efforts to try to stop this. In 1492, when America is discovered, they also decree the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. This is a topic that is controversial. It has to be studied deeply because it's not as simple as it seems. They allowed some Jews to stay, but they put some laws that basically, if you were a Jew and you wanted to keep your money and you wanted to keep your privileges, you could not do that in Spain anymore. You had to submit to certain things, and a lot of the Jews didn't want that because they were very influential. Jews were bankers, they were supporting the kings, all this stuff, and so many of them had to leave. Now, I'll make a caveat here. I speak of the Jews, but we must understand that I'm not demonizing all of the Jews. Okay, these are historical events. There is always a lot of shades and shadows in everything. There is a group of Jews that are exercising power and exercise power, and it's always happened. But not all the Jews are in that mindset. A lot of Jews are people that are just mistaken, or some of them don't even believe in their own faith. So it's important to understand I'm not demonizing all of the Jews. But this is a historical event that happens. Powerful Jews, I would say powerful Jews, are expelled. I'm giving you facts, okay? I'm not giving you my conclusions. Many of these Jews go to Germany, the Netherlands, Poland and the Middle East as well, England. They basically go to all the countries that were opposed to Spain. Spain, to understand this better, Spain was the America of now, right? Just like America right now has some kind of a superiority over the rest of the world and a political power that is influencing the rest of the world, and hence many other countries in the world hate it, because it's like, the people on top. That was what was happening with Spain at the time. And so a lot of these people go to these countries and they start finding ways to create circles of power. 1492. in the next 2 centuries, from this to the 1700s, you have the birth of the secret societies of Masonry. Masonry has a lot of points of Judaism. The ceremonials, the rites that they use, make a lot of references to the Temple of Solomon, to Hiram, to names that are proper to the Old Testament and the Jews. A lot of their ceremonies are very similar to the Kabbalah, all those things. There is a conclusion in here that I'm not making because historically I can't make it. We don't have anything to prove it. But there is certainly some connection there, or at least some historical succession that would point to something. Any questions so far? No? Okay. I think this is the best clue to the origins of Freemasonry. Not Egypt, not the Temple of Solomon. Freemasonry did not exist until the 1700s, 1600s. And it all begins in these countries that I mentioned. That's where it becomes strong, especially in England. So I think the origins are somewhere in there. Okay, let's look at the encyclical. I'm not going to read the whole thing. But before we go into that, I'll just make this comment. This encyclical is a very brave act of the Pope, of Leo XIII, because he knows that he's risking his life, and he knows that he's basically going to the dragon and poking the dragon right in the eye, like saying, hey, I see you, and I'm going to tell everyone about you. So in the first paragraph, the first 2 paragraphs, he kind of puts a background. He says, there is a kingdom of God on earth, the true church of Jesus Christ. This is in the 3rd line. And those who desire from their heart to be united with the church as to gain salvation must of necessity serve God and his only begotten Son. The other kingdom is of Satan, in whose possession and control are all whosoever follow the fatal example of their leader and of our first parents. Those who refuse to obey the divine law and eternal law, and who have many aims of their own in contempt of God, and many aims also against God. He's using the example of St. Augustine, 2 cities, the city of God, the city of the devil, and they're fighting each other. And he tells us why in the 3rd line of the 2nd paragraph. 2 loves form 2 cities. This is St. Augustine. The love of self, reaching even to contempt of God, an earthly city, and the love of God, reaching to contempt of self, a heavenly one. Notice something about Freemasonry. Freemasonry, and I'll link Satanism here. There is something in between that we would call humanism. And that's what the Pope's saying here, the worship of self. If you analyze all the ideologies of the left, it's all focused on me. Why do I abort the baby? Because I don't want to have my life ruined or moved or this. Why do I become LGBT or this or that? Because that's what I want and I don't care about any laws. Why do I become, an BLM? Because I need to have some retribution for this or that. It's all me, me, me. There is no higher law. It's all the worship of self. The Pope says in the 2nd paragraph, the enemy has always been attacking the church, but he says in the 5th line or 6th line, at this period, however, the partisans of evil seem to be combining together and to be struggling with united vehemence, led on or assisted by that strongly organized and widespread association called the Freemasons. No longer making any secret of their purposes, they are now boldly rising up against God himself. They are planning the destruction of Holy Church publicly and openly, and this with the set purpose of utterly despoiling the nations of Christendom, if it were possible, of the blessings obtained for us through Jesus Christ our Savior. Lamenting these evils, we are constrained by the charity which urges our heart to cry out often to God, and he quotes scripture there. Thy enemies have made the noise, and they that hate thee have lifted up their head. They have taken a malicious counsel against thy people, and they have consulted against thy saints. They have said, come and let us destroy them. so that they be not a nation. At so urgent a crisis, he says, when so fierce and so pressing an onslaught is made upon the Christian name, it is our office to point out the danger, to mark who are the adversaries, and to the best of our power to make head against their plans and devices, that those may not perish whose salvation is committed to us. In paragraph 5, he will give you a list of documents. Freemasonry was condemned when it first came out and when it first became known. The popes didn't condemn it because it was not very, we didn't know exactly what it was. It started being condemned later on. And so in paragraph 5, they give you some documents, and they're all, you'll find all those documents, like the name of them, in the footnotes at the end of the page over here. He's quoting Clement XII, 1738, Benedict XIV, Pius VII, Leo XII, Pius VIII, Gregory XVI, as we covered, and Pius IX. Now, paragraph 6 is interesting. It says, for as soon as the constitution and the spirit of the Masonic sect were clearly discovered by manifest signs of its actions, by the investigation of its causes, by publication of its laws and of its rights and commentaries, with the addition often of the personal testimony of those who were in the secret, this apostolic see denounced the sect of the Freemasons and publicly declared its constitution as contrary to law and right, to be pernicious no less to Christendom than to the state, and it forbade anyone to enter the society under excommunication. The sectaries, meaning the Freemasons, indignant at this, thinking to elude or to weaken the force of these decrees, partly by contempt of them and partly by calumny, accused the sovereign pontiffs who had passed them either of exceeding the bounds of moderation in their decrees or of decreeing what was not just. This was a manner in which they endeavored to elude the authority and the weight of the apostolic constitutions of all the popes aforementioned. Yet, in the very society itself, there were to be found men who unwillingly acknowledged that the Roman pontiffs had acted within their right, according to the Catholic doctrine and discipline. The pontiffs received the same assent and in strong terms from many princes and heads of governments who made it their business either to delate the Masonic Society to the Apostolic See, or of their own accord by special enactments to brand it as pernicious, as for example, in Holland, Austria, Switzerland, Spain, Bavaria, Savoy, and other parts of Italy. I'll make another break here. Two interesting things about Freemasonry. Hitler forbade it in Germany. Because Hitler, I'm not saying he was a good guy or anything, but he was a person that wanted to take the country and control it and not have anyone take it away from him. And he knew perfectly well that Freemasons were going to take power. So one of the first things he did was forbid Freemasonry. Same thing in Russia. In communist Russia, I believe, was also forbidden. They were all Freemasons, but they forbade like the other groups, the other clubs. What I want to talk to you about right now is, what was the strategy of Freemasonry? Remember that you had Catholic countries. Most of them were ruled by monarchs. There were a few republics. Venice was a republic, I believe, still. What Masons do, the first thing that they do, and this is very interesting, we have all women here in the class, so it's very interesting. At this time, when you had monarchs, you had the king and the queen. Granted, the king was a ruler, but the queen, I was talking about this in one of the shows of the Catholic Wire, which you can subscribe to. I'm just kidding. The king was the ruler, but the queen was the heart. And if you look at the stories of the Catholic monarchies, obviously there's always abuse. But the queen was there next to the king. And the king might make his decisions and he would listen to his advisors, but then the queen would come and say like, okay. And so she would have an influence in a certain way in influencing as a heart. The men can be very cold. Men usually don't think of many details. A woman would be able to see details and to kind of read people's, inner things and be able to give a more informed decision also to the king. So, for example, you saw this with the Catholic King of Spain, Isabella and Ferdinand, where Isabella was actually quite a lot of the brain. Someone was telling me that in the graves, there's like a marble carved grave of the king and the queen, and the queen's pillow is sunk more, and that was kind of like a hint of the sculpture. Now, I'm a man, so I'll say no, maybe the man was thinking more, but I'm just kidding. The point is that this is how it was. The first thing that the Freemasons do is take the queen out of the picture. Why? Because usually, who brings the piety to the house usually? Who is the one that is leading people to mass, that is calling for the rosary, all that stuff? It's usually the woman. It's true. And that's why God gave us marriage and that complement. So if you take the queen out of the picture, that means that you take the priests out of the court. But in order to take the queen, I have to give her vanity. And so this is where the courts start. When is, King Louis XIV is around the time of the Freemasons already. And at this time, to take the queen out of the court, they start vanity, 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 all this stuff, putting it together. So once you did this, the next step, the first step then is take the queen out. The second step is take the church out. And this is where we have regalism. Where the Masons start and we saw some of those condemnations in the encyclicals. The Masons start telling the king, no, the Pope cannot command in here. You have to approve what the Pope says. The Pope cannot send letters to the bishops. You have to approve that letter. This is what they also call Gallicanism. And it happened very strongly in France, where this is the Church of France, and the king is the representative of God. They took that doctrine too far. And so, no, the Pope can't say anything here without your permission. They wanted to exalt the king. So once they disconnect the king from the Pope, the next step is take down the king. And this is where you have the French Revolution. Now they use the bourgeoisie, or however you pronounce it. They use the bourgeoisie to bring down the king, and many of the people that were involved in the French Revolution were Freemasons. So that was the next step, and this is where we are right now with Leo XIII, whether this actually has happened. The next step that we're seeing right now is leftism and communism, but maybe we'll see that in next class just to keep you scared during this week. In paragraph 7, he says, "What is of highest importance, the course of events has demonstrated the prudence of our predecessors, for their provident and paternal solicitude had not always and everywhere the result desired," meaning they didn't always listen to the Pope. And this is because either of the simulation and cunning of some who were active agents in this mischief, or the thoughtless levity of the rest, who ought, in their own interest, to have given to the matter their diligent attention. So what happens was then that the sect of Freemasons grew with a rapidity beyond conception in the course of a century and a half, until it came to be able, by means of fraud or of audacity, to gain such entrance into every rank of the state, notice that, every rank of the state, as to seem to be almost its ruling power. When you look at our country today, and every modern country, and you see the head of this health organization, the head of the government, the head of the House of Representatives, the Supreme Court of Justice Court, all these people are all kind of like very, very well attuned and connected. They're all kind of like in the same page. And that is because they're receiving orders from somewhere above. This swift and formidable advance has brought upon the Church, upon the power of princes, upon the public well-being, precisely that grievous harm which our predecessors had long before foreseen. Such a condition has been reached that henceforth there will be grave reason to fear, not indeed for the Church, for her foundation is much too firm to be overturned by the effort of men. But for those states in which prevails the power, either of the sect of which we are speaking, or of other sects not dissimilar which lend themselves to it as disciples and subordinate. He says, there's an interesting thing that he says in the next one. We have several times already, as occasion served, attacked certain chief points of teaching which showed in a special manner the perverse influence of Masonic opinions. He wrote an encyclical, Leo XIII, called Quod Apostolicae Muneris, which actually is the one that we're going to see tomorrow. That's about socialism and communism. He wrote an encyclical called Arcanum about marriage, and he wrote an encyclical called Diuturnum, which speaks about how a country should be, how the government should be. So far, do we have any questions? No? Let's go to paragraph 9. I'll have a story in the meantime. There are several organized bodies which, though differing in name, this is important for us here in America. There are several organized bodies which, though differing in name, in ceremonial, in form, in origin, are nevertheless so bound together by community of purpose and by the similarity of their main opinions as to make in fact one thing with the sect of Freemasons. The sect of Freemasons is a kind of center whence they all go forth and whither they all return. Now these sects no longer show a desire to remain concealed, for they hold their meetings in the daylight and before the public eye. They publish their own newspaper organs, and yet when thoroughly understood, they are found still to retain the nature and the habits of secret societies. There are many things like mysteries which it is the fixed rule to hide with extreme care, not only from strangers, but from very many members also, such as their secret and final designs, the names of the chief leaders, and certain secret and inner meetings, as well as their decisions and the ways and means of carrying them out. Yeah, I really hope I don't get killed. I talk to people that belong to secret societies. I have a close relative that belonged to one. He was kicked out, thankfully. I knew a family that they sent a guy to become the boyfriend of a girl in the family, and they were together for like a year. And then when she was thinking of marriage already, and the guy said to her, "I really don't like you. They just sent me here. I'm just here to spy on your family." I interviewed a group of people. I can't say names, but I interviewed a group of people that belong to secret societies. How do they work? What happens is this. They have places of recruitment, right? They are interested in recruiting certain people, especially Freemasonry. Freemasonry has what you call lodges. And there's all kinds of lodges. There's lodges for priests. There's lodges for homosexuals. There's lodges for women. They try to get it everywhere they can. So they have recruit centers, as I was saying yesterday, the Boy Scouts, the Shriners, the Rotary Club, the Lions Club, churches, universities. So they have people that are keeping an eye on you. And when they see this is a guy that we could use, that, we don't just want useless people, so this is a guy that we could use, then we go and you get invited to a meeting on Wednesday or something like that. And then you go to the meeting and it turns out that it's a secret meeting. And so they'll start initiating you and telling you, usually the way they allure you, the incentives are influence. Oh, I left a very important one, fraternities in the universities. This, you see it very clearly there. What they'll offer you is influence. If you belong to the same fraternity, we're going to help each other out. And if you go to the judge and it turns out that the judge is a Freemason, then you can make the sign and you'll get off the hook, and so forth and so forth and so forth. That's why they have their secret ways of saying hello and all that stuff, because that way you can show it and you'll get the privilege that is due to you. They have, like, you know, health insurance, all that stuff. They'll take care of you if you die, of your family, is all that kind of stuff. And this is just a few, right? Obviously there's parties, and I won't go into many details in that, and all kinds of pleasures, right? In secret societies, you are introduced only to a group, a cell. And this, again, I know it because of what the people told me. So you know the person that introduced you, you'll know another group of few people that you work with, but then out of your cell, you don't know who else is there. So for example, if you're in a university, you might think, well, these people are the ones in the secret society. No, there's much more, but you don't know the rest of them. Why do they do that? Because that way, this cell can keep an eye on this one, right? And you can have someone that is watching you, and if you're trying to step out of the obedience, they can punish you. On this point, there is something else that is interesting, is, you know how Masonry has 33 degrees? And a lot of the things that they do is they have several lines of degrees. And if they see that you're a person that is willing to go quite far, you might go in the real line, and they'll actually move you forward. And as you move forward, usually you become acquainted with more of the people. You know more of the people that are involved. If they see that you're a useful idiot, with all due respect, then they'll just send you here. And you're moving on degrees, but you're not really moving on. They're just kind of rewarding you so that you keep being a useful idiot. And that's why you'll hear a lot of people that say, I was a 33-degree Mason, none of that stuff was going on. Well, he was really a nobody. I mean, none of that stuff was going on for him. But there is a writer, his name is Ricardo De La Sierra. This is all in Spanish, so sorry about that. He's a historian from Spain. He wrote a lot of books. Super hard to find, because obviously they don't want them to be found. And he interviewed real 33-degree or close to the 33-degree Masons. And they were the ones that told him that. They said, some of the steps involve, according to what he says, and some involve Satanism. So if they see that you're willing to break with your religion, they'll kind of push you more and more to see how much you can take. And if you're willing to go that far, then you'll go that far. If they see that you're not gonna, that you're a person that actually still cares a little bit about your salvation, then they won't even touch you there, and they just bring you here. So that's how they work. To make a brief break here and talk about something beautiful, in 2 days we have the Feast of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, which is our greatest defense against all these things. Okay. The next paragraph goes into what I was just explaining. He says, the one after paragraph 9. Candidates are generally commanded to promise, with a special oath, to swear that they will never to any person at any time or in any way make known the members, the passes, meaning the passwords, or the subjects discussed. Thus, with a fraudulent external appearance and with a style of simulation which is always the same, the Freemasons, like the Manichees of old, strive as far as possible to conceal themselves and to admit no witnesses but their own members. As a convenient manner of concealment, they assume the character, meaning they portray themselves as literary men, as scholars that are associated for purposes of learning. They speak of their zeal for a more cultured refinement, of their love for the poor, Shriners, and they declare their one wish to be the amelioration of the condition of the masses and to share with the largest possible number all the benefits of civil life. That's why you see a lot of the Freemasons and all these organizations, they're very, quote unquote, charitable. I'll say, as I said in a sermon, is philanthropy. They're doing things that are of philanthropy. They're helping people, they're donating money, but at the same time, they're keeping a lot of it for their purposes. Were these purposes aimed in real truth, they would, here this translation is not correct. It should say, if these were real purposes, or if these purposes were aimed at real truth, they would need not to conceal. Moreover, to be enrolled, it is necessary that the candidates promise and undertake to be thenceforward strictly obedient to their leaders and masters, with the utmost submission and fidelity, and to be in readiness to do their bidding upon the slightest expression of their will, or, if disobedient, to submit to the direst penalties and even death itself. As a fact, notice, as a fact, if any are judged to have betrayed the doings of the sect or to have resisted commands given, punishment is inflicted on them not infrequently, and with so much audacity and dexterity that the assassin very often escapes the detection and penalty of his crime. And I direct you again to the episode of the Catholic Wire where we were talking about this. And now the Pope goes in the next paragraph to see how this is something that is incredibly evil. It's, if you think about it, it's a new form of slavery. But it's an even worse slavery, because here is not just the slavery of the body, it's the slavery of the soul and of all your life. You can read this paragraph on your own, but something, for example, that they do a lot is blackmailing. So if you say that you're a Freemason and that you're thinking of going out, this also, I heard this from sources that lived through those things. They would make you go into a situation that would be very, very, how would you say that, incriminating for you. You know, like they would bring you to an apartment. There was a story that a priest told me that they called a priest into an apartment where there was all kinds of bad things. So they call him into the apartment. When he walks in, they push him in, and he's kind of like reacting, and they take the picture where he's there with all this stuff. And then they said to him, okay, now you have to cooperate with us. And I'm not sure what he did. I don't know the whole story, but things like that happen. Now, point number 11, I'll summarize it real quick. I'm speaking here about the Freemasons, and the Pope here says that. He says, what I'm saying about how evil they are and how they do this and they do that, it should be understood of the society of the Freemasons in general, but not in particular. You probably all know someone that is a Freemason here in America, and a lot of them are not evil people in the sense that they don't know what they're doing. A lot of them are lured in because of the benefits, because of the fraternity they were in the university, things like that. I know someone that told me that he had a relative that joined the Freemasons because they had like free drinks in the bar of the town. And it's like he never went to any meeting, he never did anything, but he just joined and he did that, and that was what he wanted. That's still wrong, and the Pope says that. He says they still are guilty. There is an excommunication. If you become a Freemason, if you give your name, you're excommunicated by the church. So you still have the guilt. But obviously, all these horrible things might not apply to each individual person. It's something that applies to the organization. Let's go to paragraph number 12. Any questions so far? Yes?
So it might be off topic because I don't know when they started, but are the Knights of Columbus, would they come under a secret society?
That's interesting. That's a good question. The Knights of Columbus and the Knights of St. Gregory, I think it was called, they're both organizations that are made to counteract the Freemasons. So
secret initiation and things like that?
Well, no, they were good at first, because their initiation was, they didn't pay obedience to any hidden authority. It was the bishop that was in charge, and everybody knew who everybody was. So they have initiation rites, and that was the whole point. It was, we're going to make a Catholic counterpart of this, which is actually a really good idea, where they would, because men need militancy and they need groups. And that's something that we're lacking right now as traditional Catholics. We really lack that, to have something to give men militancy. You know, they want to fight. They want to be part of a fighting group. And so that was what the Knights of Columbus and the Knights of St. Gregory, I think the name was different with them, but they were both doing that. After Vatican II, they probably got sucked into it. And I'll tell you this is a true story. I didn't hear it with my own ears. I was there, but the boys told me that. So take it as it came from a boy's mouth. We were seeing the Knights of Columbus were putting together the trips of the relics of the Cure of Ars. And we went to Omaha. They had the heart of the Cure of Ars that was beautiful. It was one of the most beautiful things I've ever done in my life. You could go in there and pray for 60 seconds. And there were 2 Knights of Columbus on the side guarding the heart. And then some of them would escort you out. So we took all the border boys over there. And we were obviously dressed as priests. And one of the boys told me that on the way out, one of the knights asked him, "Hey, would you like to become a Freemason?" And he was like, "Oh, who are you?" So again, I didn't hear it with my own ears, but I would not doubt. And well, I'm going to go on a tangent here, but based on that same question. In Mexico, you had the leftist party. This was like the revolutionary party. And you had the Catholic Party. This was supposed to be the Catholic Party anyways. For 75 years, this party was in power. 75 years, there was no chance on earth that this party could get to the presidency. They would get mayor and governor and this and that, but never nothing. A secret society begins here, called the Iron. What do you call the Iron Veil, where you hit the steel?
Anvil.
Anvil. Thank you. Yeah, it was called the Anvil. So a secret society begins in this party, and I don't know, 10 years later, they win the presidency. And it's like, now that they are all obeying a hidden head, now that they're probably all in the same page, now they're allowed to win the party. And now when you go out to Mexico and you see this party is just like, it's pretty much like rhinos, right? And the Democrats, they're both the same. Okay, paragraph 12. In paragraph 12, we'll see how some of the doctrines that were condemned, that seemed very harmless in the previous encyclicals that we read, are very much on the Freemasonry. He says, "The fundamental doctrine of the naturalists, which they sufficiently make known by their name, is that human nature and human reason ought in all things to be the top. Laying this down, they care little for their duties of God, or pervert their duties of God by erroneous and vague opinions. They deny that there is any revelation, that anything has been taught by God. They allow no dogma of religion, no dogma of truth, anything that cannot be understood by the human intelligence, or any teacher who ought to be believed by reason of his authority. And since it is the duty of the Church fully to set forth in words truths divinely received, to teach, besides other divine helps to salvation, the authority of its office, and to defend the same with perfect purity, it is against the Church that they go, because the Church goes against all their ideas." In the next paragraph, I just want to mention here a little part. He says, "By a long and persevering labor, they endeavor to bring about this result, namely, that the teaching office and authority of the Church may become of no account in the civil state. And for the same reason, they declare to the people and contend that Church and State ought to be altogether separated." That's what we were talking about yesterday. Now, I'm sure you all know, you're all familiar with the dollar bill, right? And how they have like a big Freemason sign in there. That's a pretty good one too. Now, in paragraph 14 and the next ones, the next 3 paragraphs are good to read because he speaks about the revolutions that we have been talking about. He says, nor do they think it enough to disregard the Church, the best of guides, unless they also injure it by their hostility. Indeed, with them it is lawful to attack with impunity the very foundations of the Catholic religion. In speech, in writing, and in teaching, and even the rights of the Church are not spared, and the offices with which it is divinely invested are not safe. The least possible liberty to manage affairs is left to the Church, and this is done by laws not apparently very hostile. Say, for example, you can only have 30 people in the Church or something like that. But just making a reference there. But in reality, framed and fitted to hinder freedom of action. To give you an example of this, when they started the persecution in Mexico, they put laws saying the bells can only ring for 30 seconds. And if it goes further than that, they put the priest in jail. Which is ridiculous because the bells, if you've ever seen it, it's a huge bell and you pull it with a string, and the bell just takes, it starts going. So, I mean, you can't stop it. There's no way to stop it. So it was just something they did. Moreover, we see exceptional and onerous laws imposed upon the clergy to the end that they may be continually diminished in number and in necessary means. We see also the remnants of the possessions of the Church fettered by the strictest conditions and subjected to the power and arbitrary will of the administrators of the state. To give you another example of those laws, in France they did the same. In Mexico, they passed a law by which you could only have, I think it was something like 14 priests by state. Which, in our times, that would be like, yes! Back in that day, you had all these churches. I mean, 14 wasn't enough for one city, no? So they tried to do things like that. And then paragraph 15. But against the Apostolic See and the Roman Pontiff, the contention of these enemies has been for a long time directed. The Pontiff was first, for specious reasons, thrust out from the bulwark of his liberty. He's making reference to the Pope being kicked out of Rome. Soon, and here's what I was telling you yesterday about Pius IX, he was unjustly driven into a condition which was unbearable because of the difficulties that they raised for him, for the Pope, on all sides. And now the time has come when the Freemasons openly declare what in secret they have been for a long time plotting, that the sacred power of the pontiffs must be abolished, and that the papacy itself, founded by divine right, must be utterly destroyed. If other proofs were wanting, this fact would be sufficiently disclosed by the testimony of men well informed, of whom some at other times and others again recently have declared it to be true of the Freemasons that they especially desire. So there were men that were Freemasons and came out and told the Pope that the Freemasons especially desire to assail the Church with irreconcilable hostility, and that they will never rest until they have destroyed whatever the Supreme Pontiffs have established for the sake of religion. Here is a very interesting part. You might hear... Okay, I still have like 15 minutes. That's not a promise. You might hear from some people, well, I became a Freemason, and they said it was fine if I was Catholic. Even if I was a priest or whatever, they said it was fine. And here's what they say. Paragraph 16. If those who are admitted as members are not commanded to abjure, meaning, yes, if they don't command you to abjure by any words the Catholic doctrines, this omission, so far from being adverse to their designs, is actually more useful for their purposes. Because first, in this way, they easily deceive the simple-minded and the heedless, in other words, useful idiots, and can induce a far greater number to become members. Again, as all who offer themselves are received, whatever may be the form of their religion, they thereby teach the great error of this age, what we have been talking about, indifferentism. That a regard for religion should be held as an indifferent matter, and that all religions are alike. This manner of reasoning is calculated to bring about the ruin of all forms of religion, and especially of the Catholic religion. There are three principles of Freemasonry that you'll hear very often. Is equality, equality, fraternity, quote unquote, and liberty, which we should call it libertarian. And in this, obviously, they mix religion, and this is all Vatican II. That's what Bishop Lefebvre used to say when Bishop Lefebvre had to start fighting against Vatican II. He said, "It's the French Revolution going into the church." There's a good quote in paragraph 18. In the previous paragraph, the Pope is saying how Freemasons, in the end, make no problem in denying God. For them, it is the same if you believe in God or if you don't believe in God. And so for them, revelation and God doesn't matter. But in point 18, he's saying something that it's very interesting when you see what's happening today. When this greatest fundamental truth, the existence of God, has been overturned or weakened, it follows that those truths also, which are known by the teaching of nature, must begin to fall. Right now they have the whole controversy of, transgender, what is a woman, what is a man, children are saying that they're animals. The very basic things of nature, we're forgetting them, and we're lost. And this is what the Pope is saying 200 years ago. This is a little bit less than 200 years ago. I keep saying 200 years, but you know what I'm saying. He says again, number 19, when these truths are done away with, which are as the principles of nature and important for knowledge and for practical use, it is easy to see what will become of both public and private morality. We say nothing of all the virtues, the theological virtues, the grace of God, the sacraments, all those things. But once you get away from those truths, then that eternal law that commands the natural order to be maintained and forbids that it be disturbed, that the last end of man is a destiny far above human things and beyond this sojourning upon the earth, all of these laws will be done away with as well. If all these laws of God be taken away, he says in the next paragraph, as the naturalists and Freemasons desire, there will immediately be no knowledge as to what constitutes justice and injustice, or upon what principle morality is founded. And in truth, the teaching of morality, which alone finds favor with the sect of Freemasons, and in which they contend that youth should be instructed, is that which they call civil and independent and free, namely that which does not contain any religious belief. And then here's, again, going back to that, in the 6th line, for wherever, by removing Christian education, this teaching has begun more completely to rule, there goodness and integrity of morals have begun quickly to perish. Monstrous and shameful opinions have grown up, and the audacity of evil deeds has risen to a high degree. What the Pope is saying, in other words, is if you remove Christian education, Catholic education, you're going to have gay parades, you're going to have children dressed as cats, you're going to have riots in the middle of the city, you're going to have people that come and rob a store and nobody does anything to them. There was a thing that happened in the news recently where there was this woman that was run over with her baby. Did anyone see that? Yeah. She was like walking in the street, and this guy, there's a lot of room, and the guy goes straight for her and runs her over. Very good mother, because the first thing she does is protect the baby, and she gets run over, and nothing happened to both of them. They both survive. But the first thing that she does, she just got run over, and she just gets up, and the baby, where's the baby? And a guy in the other side of the street comes and hits the car head on to stop him. He was given, I think, 4 months?
Something like that.
4 months in like probation or something. I mean, like nothing.
I think it was 5, but yeah, it was probation. He didn't have to go to jail.
He didn't have to go to jail.
They found him later.
Was he a Mason?
Well, this was LA, so But this is what the Pope is saying. He's saying, if you remove God from the picture, then there's no morality, because how do you determine what's God and what's right and what's wrong? If God, I'm going to erase this. I'm going to erase Mexican history here. if God doesn't give you the law, you still need to have a law, but you're saying, no, God is not going to give me the law. Then who gives you the law? The current party. The Democrat or the Republican or whoever. They are the ones that determine what's right and what's wrong. And that's why right now if I go and say, I don't know, that homosexuality is wrong, I'm committing a great moral evil. Like I'm to be excommunicated, I'm put in jail and muzzled. And if I go and try to teach religion in a school, I'm committing a great moral evil because the laws are coming from the party now. And if the party changes, the laws are going to change. So that's what the Pope is saying. Once you take the God out of the picture, you're in for chaos. Let's see. I don't want to make the class as long as yesterday. So I'm going to try to summarize it. A lot of these things we have been seeing before. There's a lot. The paragraph right after paragraph 20, I want to read you something and then just talk about it briefly. It's the last 5 lines. The last 5 lines before paragraph 21. Since generally no one is accustomed to obey crafty and clever men so submissively as those whose soul is weakened and broken down by the domination of passions, there have been in the sect of the Freemasons some who have plainly determined and purposed that artfully and of set purpose the multitude should be satiated with a boundless license of vice, as when this had been done, it would easily come under their power and authority for any acts of daring. What is he saying there? He's saying that the Freemasons have a plan, and this comes from way back. You can't control someone that has principles. You can't control someone that has something to fight for. If you are a person that has power of will, power even in your body, then they can control you. That's why they have the whole thing with the gun laws right now. That's one part of it. And that's why they bring so many people from different countries. Globalization. If I have one country that has their own traditions, that have their own morals, that have their own history that binds them together, and I try to control them, they're all together, and they're going to jump at me. But if I manage to separate them all and split them into different groups and have a group of Mexicans and a group of Chinese and a group of blacks and a group of this and that, and I tell them all, I keep telling them all, you're all divided. Remember, you're all divided. Remember, you hate each other. Remember, all the stuff that you hear in the news today. Then these people are very easy to control. Very easy to control because they'll never unite against me. And what the Pope is saying here is also pleasure. I can tell you this, and I see it. I'm not talking of anyone here in the church, but I've met young people all over the place, and you see immediately a boy or a girl that was never told to do chores, that was never told to do anything hard, that was always left with their phone, with TV, just a couch potato, if not worse. They're absolutely useless. Useless. You can't get them to do anything. The hardest little thing, nothing. And the Masons are aware of that. And that's why from the time of Leo XIII, they decided we're going to push in society all this filth so that we can control them. Notice this very interesting thing. Buzz Lightyear just came out here, the movie from Disney, with, filth. And here is obviously allowed. In China and in Russia, it's forbidden because they want their people to be strong. A lot of the Japanese cartoons that became so popular here in America, in Mexico too, were forbidden in Japan. And the government exported, like they would actually help the companies to export this entertainment, but at the same time said, we're not going to watch it here because we want to keep ourselves strong. And so that's what they do. In the paragraph before 22, he speaks again about the plan of the education of the youth and how they put a great effort into that, but we've covered that before. Now, paragraph 22 and 23, this might be one of the most controversial parts of this class. Feel free to object. I really hope I don't get in trouble for these videos because priest meetings are coming. I might be told, Father, be quiet and just say Mass, okay? I'm just kidding. Number 22 speaks about equality. I grew up in a public school, and you always hear equality, 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 and it makes perfect sense. And the first time that I heard a priest, there's no such thing, in a certain way at least, I was like, what? The Pope here says, of course, there's equality in certain things. We all have, obviously, basic rights, the rights that you have with the Ten Commandments. We are all children of God in the sense that we're all called to be children of God. We're all called to salvation. Jesus died for all of us. There is no one that our Lord said, well, for this one I'm not dying, he doesn't deserve it. He died for all of us. Not all of us profit from it, but at least everything is offered to us. But there's no such thing as absolute equality, meaning we're all supposed to be the same. That doesn't exist. It's impossible to exist. Even if we fight for it, even if we do everything that we can, I will be uglier than some other guy that is going to be prettier than me. There will be a guy that is fatter than me, and no matter how hard he works out, he'll never get rid of his fat. There's gonna yeah, it's true. There's people that are just dumber than others. And I'll say, I see myself with other priests, and for example, let's say the bishop, and he's like, there's no way I'm ever going to get there. I just don't have that brain. Or Bishop Sanborn, for example, it's like, I don't have that power in my brain. I don't have that mental muscle. I can work as hard as I can. I can study everything. I still need to make notes. The bishop will be talking to you, Bishop Pivaronas, and he'll just quote, dates and names and everything, and the page in that book and the page in that book. Funny story. This is when I just came to the seminary. I had been there for like 2 months. And I saw the bishop giving classes and everything, and I was very impressed. And I said to him, raise my hand. Yes. Your Excellency, what method do you use to be able to know all these things? And he, the bishop, if you know the bishop, he looks at me like, and he says,
Just like that.
yeah, I've given class for 25 years. Okay. So I have 24 more to go. But we cannot be equal. It's just impossible. Not only that, there's different merits too, and that's very important. Merit makes us unequal. If someone is working harder, he has to get more. And if someone is working less, he has to get less. And that's just the way things are. And not only that, society is impossible to be run if we don't have inequality. Because you need to have someone on top to give orders to others. That's just how it is. You need to have someone that takes care of the trash. And the person that takes care of the trash cannot be sitting in an office. Because then who's going to take care of the trash? Right? And there's a joke, but I can't say it because I'm on video. But it's where the gist of it is that the members of the body were fighting for equality, and you can imagine how that went. And the Pope actually gives that example here. He says, in a body, you have to have different members. And the feet has to be down, and they have to be on the floor, stepped on. And the eyes have to be up, and you have to be very careful with your eyes. They have to be taken care of very nicely. And every member of the body has to be where it is. Society has to work with inequality. Let's go to paragraph 27 on page 6. I find this encyclical very important for this reason. If you talk to anyone about Freemasons and all that stuff, they'll say, oh, that's what I was telling you the other day, the first day. That's that stuff, those are myths, it's not that bad. And here you have the authority of the Pope telling you this is evil, what they do, all these things. In paragraph 27, in the last 5 lines again, he puts the Freemasons, he connects the Freemasons with communism and socialism. He says, this change and overthrow of the revolution is deliberately planned and put forward by many associations of communists and socialists, and to their undertakings the sect of Freemasons is not hostile, meaning they're friends, but greatly favors their designs and holds in common with them their chief opinions. And if these men do not at once and everywhere endeavor to carry out their extreme views, that is not to be attributed to their teaching and their will, but to the virtue of Catholicism that cannot be destroyed and that is opposing them. If you read online that communism comes from the Freemasons and socialism comes from the Freemasons, and you'll have in that website, usually on the site here, a little link to Alex Jones or something like that. No offense if anybody likes him. But this kind of stuff already is kind of like, okay, conspiracy theory, this is all website stuff, some guy that wrote it down. Here you have the Pope telling you they're connected. These guys are working together. Let's go to paragraph 28. Would that all men would judge of the tree by its fruit, and would acknowledge the seed and origin of these evils which press upon us, and of the dangers that are impending. We have to deal with a deceitful and crafty enemy, who, gratifying the ears of people and of princes, has ensnared them by smooth speeches and by adulation, ingratiating themselves with rulers under a pretense of friendship. That's what I was telling you about, how they went for the princes. The Freemasons have endeavored to make them their allies and powerful helpers for the destruction of the Christian name, and that they might more strongly urge them on, they have, with determined calumny, accused the Church of contending with rulers in matters that affect their authority and sovereign power. So that I already explained that. Let's go to paragraph 31. This is the last sheet, so okay, I am making better time today. In the last sheet, he's giving just instructions to the bishops as to how to fight this threat. I do want to give you a little bit of a historical break again. Have you heard the names of the Marquis de Pombal? Or the Count of Aranda? Have you heard these names before? No? You're supposed to be just out of school. I'm just kidding. Put you on the spot. I should put a camera over here so I could put people on the spot too.
Nobody will come.
The catechism classes, I was telling someone that I was going to record them, and that was the first question that they asked. Is like, are we going to be on camera? I was like, no. I would be sued. Okay, so here the Pope was just telling us how the Freemasons went for the princes. I told you that as well. The Marquis de Pombal became very famous in Portugal. He was the right hand of the king in Portugal. And the Count of Aranda was the right hand of the king in Spain, both at the same time, around the same time. The Marquis de Pombal is the one that started. Remember that at this time you had one dynasty of kings, and I won't put the name because I might make a mistake, that was ruling a lot of Europe. It was the same family, the Habsburg, I think it was. And the Marquis de Pombal started putting pressure on all the different kings so that they would tell the Pope to expel the Jesuits. He wanted to get rid of the Jesuits, and that's when the persecution against the Jesuits began. And he was pushing and pushing and pushing. And for example, they had the Jesuits starting a lot of missions in America, and it got so bad that they forced the Jesuits to abandon the Indians. They said, you have to let them be. And there's actually a movie about that, but the movie is not commendable. So he is the responsible of the expulsion, of the suppression of the Jesuit order. Why? The Jesuits at that time were very good. And they were kind of like the Navy SEALs of the Pope. It was a very particular order because their vow was, we will do what the Pope tells us to do. So literally the Pope could go to a convent of Jesuits and grab a guy and tell him, I want you to go to China tomorrow. And they would go to China tomorrow. And there were cases like that where the Pope would say, I want you to send 10 people there. And it was like kind of like the bishop does with us sometimes. Okay, pick up your stuff. There you go, with the sisters too. The sisters are like the Navy SEALs of the bishop. So he's the one that causes that suppression where I was telling you they grabbed all the Jesuits from a country from one day to another. Boom, they're all out. And the reason why, this was one reason. The other reason was schools. The Jesuits were creating schools like crazy. A lot. They were responsible for the education of a lot of the Catholic countries. So they knew, if we take out the Jesuits, all those schools are going to be empty. And that literally happened. They expelled them, and the schools were left empty. And who's going to take them? The government. The Count of Aranda was at this time Spain was still in I'm going to try to make a little drawing here of America. Let's say that's horrible. There you go. There's Mexico. That's a little bit better. Spain was in all of this in America was within the influence of Spain. It wasn't properly an empire because these were their own countries, but they all responded to Spain, and Spain was politically, obviously, the mother, you could say, of these countries. The Count of Aranda convinces, at this time, revolutions start happening in Mexico, in Colombia, in everywhere else, here and there. Brazil was from Portugal. And the Count of Aranda convinces the king. He tells him, let it be, and just let them, lose them. It's not good for us. Because at that time, Napoleon was a threat as well. So he is responsible of all these countries dropping the crown of Spain. And you see there, these both were known Freemasons. If you go to Freemasons' websites, they put their names in there. And they also put the name of John the 23rd, by the way. Whatever credit you might want to give to that, because it's them, but they do that in some of them. And actually, when John the 23rd died, the Freemasons put a sign on the newspapers, sorrowing for the death of brother John the 23rd. Again, whatever credit you might want to give to that. I do have the picture of that, I think. So to finish, the Pope will give the bishops a number of recommendations. And this goes to me, this is a part that I could take for myself. He actually, one might say, I'll be honest with you, and I'm almost done with the talk, I promise now. We'll count 10 minutes.
We're in no hurry.
I think it's very important for us as traditional Catholics to focus on the positive side. I don't like to talk about these topics very much, because I think it's looking at the darkness, and what I need is to look at the light, right? I need to go to Christ, I need to love our Lord, I need to love our Blessed Mother, I need to go to heaven. And that is the important part, really. I mean, if we do that, this other part is not that much necessary, but it's still necessary. So I try to focus always on the positive things. You know that my sermons are not like very fire and brimstone. I might have a couple coming. But the Pope here tells the bishops, the first thing that he says to them, he says, it's in paragraph 31 in page 7, and it's after the first, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the fifth line in the middle. We wish it to be your rule, first of all, to tear away the mask from Freemasonry, and to let it be seen as it really is, and by sermons and pastoral letters, to instruct the people as to the artifices used by societies of this kind in seducing men and enticing them into their ranks, and as to the depravity of their opinions and the wickedness of their acts. As our predecessors have many times repeated, let no man think that he may, for any reason whatsoever, join the Masonic sect, even if it's for drinking beer at the bar. He doesn't say that, but I added that. If he values his Catholic name and his eternal salvation as he ought to value them, let no one be deceived by a pretense of honesty. It may seem to some that Freemasons demand nothing that is openly contrary to religion and morality, but as the whole principle and object of the sect lies in what is vicious and criminal, to join with these men or in any way to help them cannot be lawful. So the Pope is telling me and bishops first, and the priest aid the bishops, to unmask and to preach it. So that's what we're trying to do here. Then in paragraph 32 he says, further, by assiduous teaching and exhortation, the multitude must be drawn to learn diligently the precepts of religion, for which purpose we earnestly advise that by opportune writings and sermons they be taught the elements of those sacred truths in which Christian philosophy is contained. The result of this will be that the minds of men will be made sound by instruction and will be protected against many forms of error and inducements to wickedness, especially in the present unbounded freedom of writing and insatiable eagerness for learning. And then he mentions in there that this will be easy in paragraph 33. He says, this will be easy to you if you get the help of the priests, of the clergy. There's three more things that he mentions. In paragraph 34, he mentions the third order of St. Francis, because he was a part of the third order. But I guess this could be summarized as works of piety. The best thing that we can do to oppose these enemies of the church is piety, is praying, is coming to Mass, is actually growing spiritually. That is much more powerful because, as St. Paul tells us, we're not fighting against men, we're fighting against devils. Meaning, it's not the men that are pushing this, it's the devils that are inspiring them. And so if we do prayers, if we pray the rosary, if we do penances in reparation, now that the Sacred Heart of Jesus is coming, if we do all these things, it's much more powerful, unimaginably much more powerful than if I go and try to be a politician. Okay? Because being a politician is like giving an aspirin, praying is like giving chemo. Okay? Like going straight to the root, like burning the inside of it. The 35 is a very interesting point, and this goes for us. Guilds. I pronounce it right, yay! Guilds, he says, as what I was saying, we need groups, we need social circles. Human beings do, and especially as I've been telling many of you, children do, young people do. So very important to unite in those kind of groups, right? We have guilds here for several activities in the church. That's very good. The Confraternity of Christian Mothers, all those things give you strength. We need to have something like that for men as well. And something that I might be criticized for, but I really insist on, and hopefully we can do it in the future, is to have stuff for young people. Stuff where young people can come and socialize here. And even if they say Father Cepeda is very very lax, because he allows young people to come into the church. But it's like, it's that or nothing. I don't want them to have to go to like the horrible places that they're around. So it's better to give them, and this is a job of the parents, to give them a social circle. This ends the encyclical. I just say one quote from paragraph 36. It's in the second line. Going back to, he speaks to the bishops now about the instruction of the youth, and he says, do not think that any precaution can be great enough in keeping them from masters and schools whence the pestilent breath of the sects is to be feared. Under your guidance, let parents, religious instructors, and priests having the cure of souls use every opportunity in their Christian teaching of warning their children and pupils of the infamous nature of these societies. And I will end with this. Yes, almost 10 minutes. I will end with this. Children, youth, we have three scenarios. They're exposed, they're sheltered and young. Sheltered and young. Or they're sheltered and they're ready to go, older. If they're exposed, meaning they're in public schools, they have friends from public schools and all that, you have to teach them about all these things and warn them. Not so much the secret societies, because that's not as popular right now, but about communism, about LGBT stuff, all that stuff. You don't want to tell them that if they haven't been exposed. If a child has never in his time heard about what the rainbow is just the rainbow. All right? And you're not going to bring to their innocence something that they haven't been exposed to. But when they ask the question, then you have to explain and explain it as much as is necessary, only as much as is necessary. Sheltered and young. When they're sheltered and young, that's when that applies. You don't tell them anything. If they're sheltered, or they have been sheltered for a while and they're getting to an older age, you can, as a parent, you have to start seeing when is the time for me to prepare them for that, and to explain to them, okay, this is going on, and that's going on, and blah, blah, blah. And what's very important is you have to impress in their minds that it is evil. Not just that it's not Catholic, not just that it's against order, that is evil. That the LGBT thing is evil, that communism is evil. That's why the popes use such a strong language. It's not because they were angry, probably they were, but it's because you have to impress on the mind of your child that this is an evil thing to do. And I'll share this with you. This is honest. I grew up in a public school. I was exposed to the world from the very, very young age. And I listened to a commentator that is a political commentator, that he's always bashing against these things. And he'll give you the news and then he'll tell you this is bad, that's bad, that's bad. And even though I listened to that all the time, one time I caught myself, I was driving back and forth. That's what I listened to keep awake. And I was driving and I heard the news and I caught myself like in the very back of my mind thinking, maybe like we have to tolerate that. I didn't say it in my mind or anything, but there was like in the very back of my mind a very tiny voice almost saying, well, maybe you have to tolerate that. And I was shocked because I know perfectly well that that was wrong. But why did that thought came to my mind? Because I've been exposed to it so much that it comes to a point where you say, maybe. And that's what you have to avoid. No, maybe. It's evil. Homosexuality, all those kind of things, is not just a personal practice or private. It's a crime. It's evil. That's why it was forbidden before. And just as, for example, you would say, you would not allow a murderer to come into your house if you know that he's a murderer, an unrepentant murder, right? Like, repenting is a different thing. But if someone comes to your house and he says, oh, I murder for a living, and I like to murder people all the time, actually proud, woo, I'm very proud about murdering. It's like, get out of my house and I'm calling the cops on you. Why do you do that? Because murder is evil and a crime. Yes, you also don't want to get killed. But these are the reasons. And so if perversion, let's just call it that, is also evil, and therefore is also a crime. And I know that many of you, well, I don't know, I don't want to be a rash judgmental. Maybe some of you right now are seeing this and going like, really? Because we have heard it so much, but this is true. And that's why it's perfectly lawful to say, no, you don't come into my house. Or no, I don't want you to teach children in school. Or no, you are not allowed to go in public and saying this. Why? Because it's something that is not right. So it's very hard because honestly, we're being rained on all the time. But that's the last point that the Pope says is, You have to tell them. You have to train them into this. Now, quick note, that doesn't mean hating the person. We certainly don't hate anybody. Quite the contrary. We wish good for them. And it doesn't mean that you have to go out there and you know, be angry about it and all that stuff. But at least you have to be aware that this is something evil and that I have no part with it whatsoever. No part with it whatsoever. And I oppose it. And that was the gloomy end of this talk today. But again, we have the Sacred Heart coming on Friday, and that's going to be a beautiful feast day. Any questions? No? Comments? I promise next year I'll pick a lot better, a lot more encouraging talks.
I know, like I said, my eldest was in public school up until 5th grade, and I noticed, just as a comment, that there were a lot of things she didn't tell me that had happened to her until after I had pulled her out after we homeschooled, and she said that she wasn't, teachers would come up to her, not allow her to pray over her meals and stuff like that, and I was like, why didn't you tell me? She's like, well, I thought I would be doing something wrong, you know, or I thought like I was doing something wrong and I should listen to the teacher. It's just,
Yeah.
there's ways that they influence, I guess, that you kids don't even know is wrong.
Well, that's exactly the thing. The most dangerous part of it is that you as a child, you don't know. So I can tell you for myself, I went to public middle school and we had a teacher now 30 years, actually, when I was 27 years old, I thought about it and I was like, whoa, like that's what was happening. Because it was a teacher, this was the art teacher, and obviously, now that I think about it, he was one of those. And he would put us these movies that were art movies, totally perverted now that I think about it. But I remember us, the kids, we would watch the movie and we'd be like, what the heck's going on? Like, I mean, we wouldn't see neither the evil or anything about it. We would just be like, this is totally crazy. Like, what's the point of this? And we just, then you don't think about it, so you don't tell your parents. Only after you grow up. Now that I grew up, I realized this guy was recruiting. He was putting the movie and seeing if anyone reacted, and then if they reacted, he would go there. But you only realize after you're an adult, and that's why it's so important. That's why public schools is quite an issue right now. So I'll end with that then, and with the point of trying to focus on the positive side. We know these things. Now with that, we know the evil. We know to take care and not go there. And it's good to have these documents so that if this topic of conversation comes, keep those documents, put them somewhere where you know that they are, so that if this topic of conversation comes, you don't tell someone, oh, Father told me so. No, you tell them, here's this encyclical of the Pope. And that's a very reliable source.
Thank you for listening to the Catholic Wire. If you have found this show helpful, please say a prayer for all our collaborators. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels and share with your friends. For questions and comments, you may contact us at thecatholicwire.org.